That's good. You guys ever just worship through song like that and just feel like, man, this is what we were made for? You know? There's something about it that just reminds you kind of your place. I think too often we just kind of go through life feeling like the world revolves around us. And it's something about worship through song specifically that just kind of, he must increase, I must decrease. I wasn't made to be the center of my life. I wasn't made to be the center of everything. He is God, I am not. And there's so much freedom in that. And so you just think about, man, what if my whole life really was an act of worship? You know, what if I really did have that posture in everything that I did and not just in these moments? There's just so much freedom in being able to say, I'm human, I'm finite, I'm limited. My perspective is limited. God, thank you that I just get to spend eternity remembering how glorious and how good and how awesome you are and lifting you up. That's what we were made for. That's what we were made for. All right, well, got a fairly brief message today, but it's just something that I've kind of been wrestling with a bit lately. I just needed to kind of process through, and I feel like God's given me a bit of clarity on it. I wanted to share it because I don't think it's just a me issue. I think this is a cultural and a church issue as well. And it kind of feels especially relevant as we enter into the holiday season here. You guys have probably heard me say this before. I say it a lot. I think it's really important to remember that we live in what is called the digital age. Which basically means that we have greater access to information, to news, to happenings around the world, to people, and to relationships than anyone, anywhere, at any time in the history of the world ever has. That's what it means to be alive today. At the tip of our fingers, in the palm of our hands, we have all of this access to anything we could imagine. There's certainly some great things about that. Again, access to information we need. I'll be honest, I was sitting up here and this is embarrassing, but I'm going to mention a story here a little bit later about a prophet. And the name that I had written down, I was thinking about it, I'm like, that doesn't seem right. And so I Googled it real quick while I was up here and realized I had the wrong name, but thank God for instant access to information at my fingertips, right? I don't have to come up here and sound like an idiot even though I just told you I was, so there's that. But thankful for that, right? Instant access to information that I need, the ability to know what's happening anywhere around the world, to be able to contact any person, anywhere, anytime. There's certainly advantages and upsides to that. However, at the same time, I look at the correlation between advancements in technology, this 24/7 instant access to all the information we could gather, global news, access to any relationship and people anywhere. I look at the correlation between that and the skyrocketing rates of anxiety, depression, addiction, and all kinds of mental illness. And I can't help but ask the question, is this actually good for us? Is this healthy? Or are we actually meant to live this way with access to all of this information? And it kind of makes me feel old saying this, but back in my day, it wasn't that long ago that our worlds were simply much smaller and more manageable. We didn't know everything that was happening around the globe. We weren't being inundated with constant news, information, advertisements. We didn't have the capacity even to feel like we needed to maintain all kinds of different relationships to one extent or the other. We just weren't aware of and in contact with so many people all the time. We didn't have 24/7 news cycles. we didn't have social media, our worlds were smaller, our circles were tighter, our options were much more limited. Again, this is not to say that a smaller world and a tighter circle are necessarily great in and of themselves, but what has come with greater access to more opportunities in the world has also been this exceeding pressure to do more, know more, gain more, accomplish more, impact more, be more. Bigger is better, more, more, more. It's one way in which I think capitalism actually has infiltrated and shaped not only our broader culture, but also the church itself. In capitalism, anything that limits profits, anything that limits gains, anything that limits opportunities for growth is seen as a negative. And this is kind of the American way, right? Get a bigger house, get a bigger car, bigger truck, get a higher paying job so you can accumulate more, so you can grow your business, grow your church. Bigger is better, more, more, more. The stories that we celebrate are all about people who exceeded their limitations, are all about people who pushed through boundaries. We love the idea of unlimited potential and opportunities. And again, that's not necessarily all bad, but some of that, I think, has been harmful, not only to our witness as followers of Jesus, but also to our own mental, emotional, and spiritual health. In fact, this trend reminds me a bit of Jesus' warning, where he says, be careful that you don't gain the world, but lose your soul. In other words, watch out that you don't get sucked into this ideology of limitless consumption and accomplishment. Because in your attempt to gain more, impact more, and chase unlimited opportunities, you may end up sacrificing the deepest, truest, realest parts of yourself, your soul, your overall well-being. On a similar, related note, let me turn this on here. Help me out, Meg. I'm blinking green. There we go. There's a guy who was a Harvard Law graduate. His name was Pete Davis. He recently wrote a book called Dedicated, The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. I texted Lucas about this the other day, and he sent me a picture of the book. He's got it already. I'm gonna borrow it from him, but we talk about this quite a bit. So in his book, he claims that our society is caught up in what he calls a state of infinite browsing mode. So he kind of compares this state to this idea of you sit down on the couch to watch a movie on Netflix or whatever platform you may use, and you start searching for a movie, and you see one that looks pretty good, but you hesitate to actually watch it because there may be a better one down the line, so you keep scrolling, you keep browsing, and pretty soon a half hour's gone by, and you start to get a little tired. You're like, I think I'm just going to go to bed. And you don't actually commit to watching anything for fear that you may miss out on something better. I've done this many times. Anyone else? Anyone else done that? Infinite browsing. Davis says that he's come to see this as the defining characteristic of our generation. And when I say our, I mean probably mine and younger. But I do think our culture has been shaped by this, and it has infiltrated even up to some older generations as well. Keeping our options open is a defining characteristic of our generation. He compares growing up and leaving home to walking out of one room into a long hallway with hundreds of different doors to infinitely browse. And there's good that can come from having more options than we've ever had, for sure. But there's also downsides to having so many doors to browse. He said nobody wants to be stuck behind a locked door, right? Everyone wants to have options. He said, but nobody wants to live in a hallway either. In a world where infinite choices is the defining characteristic, we oftentimes end up living in the hallway, afraid that if we commit to one door, we may miss out on something better. But the sad reality is this: the more that we jump from door to door, from option to option, the less satisfied we become with any one choice or commitment. Our culture tells us to live in the hallway, to kind of keep our distance and keep our options open. It's safer that way. Just in case you commit to this person or this community and they let you down. Just in case you commit to this practice or to this discipline and it doesn't work right away. Just in case you jump into this mission or to this cause and it's not effective or maybe it collapses. Just in case something or someone better comes along, keep your options open and keep a safe distance. Live in the hallway. As I was thinking about this and Davis's kind of explanation of our culture and what's going on, I was reminded of one of Emily's roommates in college. Her name was Amanda, but now she goes by Manda. She's very specific about that. Not Amanda, Manda. Her name is now Amanda Carpenter. I made sure to write it that way. She's an author, she's a blogger, she's a very influential person. But her and her husband named Eric, they were foster parents. I don't know if they still are, but they've fostered somewhere around 20 kids. And she talks about being a foster parent. And if you've ever been a foster parent or if you know someone that is a foster parent, you've probably heard someone tell you, give you the advice that many people gave Amanda and her husband Eric. They said, don't get too attached. It's just going to hurt more when they leave. Which is probably true. I can't imagine how hard that would be. I think of, Mitch and Emily had a foreign exchange student with them, Sal. You guys remember, and she was only here for 5 or 6 months. But we got pretty attached. Emily and Mitch especially really loved her. She was fantastic. And when she left to go back to Japan, it was heartbreaking. So everyone was telling Amanda, in a sense, hey, live in the hallway. Play it safe. Don't jump into this door and fully commit to these kids because you'll get hurt. But in response, Amanda came up with a phrase that came to embody her approach to fostering and to life. It was just this 3-word phrase. She had it printed on T-shirts. She had it everywhere. It was kind of her mantra for life. And it was just these 3 words. It was, get too attached. Take the risk. Walk through that door. Commit everything you have to these kids, knowing that it's going to hurt in the end when they leave. Why would Amanda and Eric do that? Why would this become their mantra? I think it's because of this. The very things which limit us are most often the things which give our lives value and make it meaningful. So choose commitment. The very things which limit us are most often the things which give our lives value and make it meaningful. So choose commitment. Commitment requires intentionally limiting your options. It means coming to see limits not as hindrances, but actually embracing limitations as a gift. You think about it, commitment to one spouse or to one partner means intentionally saying no to every other potential spouse or partner, right? Commitment to one friend, commitment to one activity, commitment to one community, commitment to one practice or spiritual discipline, commitment to one local mission or cause, commitment to the way and the person of Jesus means saying no to many other options. It means embracing limits. Why? Because these are the very things which give life its meaning and its value. Love itself requires commitment, right? Commitment requires knowing and embracing our limitations. And embracing our limits, saying no to every other option so we can say yes to the 1 or 2 right in front of us, I think, and I'm coming to see, can only happen well when we see limits as an opportunity to trust a good God. Like I said, this is kind of personal for me at the moment. Lately, more than ever, it feels like there's just so much to do and so little time, right? So many needs, so many relationships, so many opportunities. And again, simply because we live in the age that we do, in the digital age, we are exposed to and aware of more things happening locally and globally than anyone ever has been in the history of humanity. And I'm convinced that this heightened awareness alone greatly impacts us and weighs on us, whether we realize it or not. And so I believe that this idea of embracing limits and choosing commitment is for the church as a whole. But I'll just speak for myself for now in regards to community life, in regards to my own formation, in regards to missional purpose. I feel like God is calling me to a depth of experience and maturity that I'll never reach as long as I'm continuously stretched thin, scattered, distracted, only able to skim the surface of things because I'm jumping at every opportunity or rushing to try to meet every need that I'm aware of. And I've realized lately that committing to just a few things and embracing my limits, my finiteness, my humanity, has to go hand in hand. And this has been the real challenge for me with developing a healthy prayer life and trusting that God is ultimately good and at work redeeming and restoring all things. God, I can do what you asked me and let these other things go, knowing that you are good, you are at work, and I can still partner with you in those things through prayer, right? Jesus modeled this perfectly. Dave, you already mentioned as we're entering into the season of Advent, this means that we're celebrating a God who, out of love for the world, embraced limits and chose to commit. A God with endless options chose, first of all, to enter into covenant with, to enter into loving, committed relationship with one chosen people, with one man, Abraham, and his descendants. Through the highs and the lows, through the good and the bad, he found ways to be present with his people. He wasn't distant. He didn't live in the hallway playing it safe. God got too attached. In fact, he was so attached that he told the prophet Hosea, I knew that, to marry a prostitute, Gomer, who ends up leaving Hosea multiple times. And God says, this is what it's like for me to be in relationship and covenant with you. When you, as my people, disobey and deliberately run off to other gods, it's like you're a cheating spouse. It hurts that much. But God didn't play it safe. He didn't stay in the hallway with limitless options and just choose a different people when Israel let him down. Out of love, he was committed to these people for the long haul. In fact, he embraced his limits even more so, committing to them to the point of incarnation. Not clinging to his divine privilege, but emptying himself, took on flesh, became a man, took the nature of a servant, was born as a baby in a barn, in a feeding trough, lived among the poor and the destitute. He was homeless, mistreated, misunderstood, abandoned, ultimately abused, and crucified. Jesus showed us what God's like and what love does. Love, as John said it in the Message version, Eugene Peterson said, love moved into the neighborhood. Love takes on flesh. But here's the interesting thing. Check out this pattern. Out of love for the whole world, God committed himself to one group of people, to one family. Then out of love for that family, he took on flesh, and Jesus commits himself really to 12 people, right? Then out of love for those 12 people, he went even deeper and committed really to 3, Peter, James, and John. He invested himself to the utmost in these 3 guys. Notice the pattern. Out of love for the whole world, he commits to a people group. Out of love for that people, he commits to 12. And out of the 12, he really commits and goes deepest with 3. And I think of Jesus and the deep level of commitment that he had to these guys. And in order to say yes to them, it meant saying no to many other options. And I think about how hard that had to have been when literally every sick, hurting, broken person around him was constantly coming around. And how hard that it had to have been for Jesus to embrace not only his limitations, the limitations of being human, right, but also the limitations that came with saying yes to what the Father had for him. And so having to say no to these people. But I think what made that easier was that, again, he trusted a good God that he was in constant communion with. He embraced his limits as a human being and said, God, I'm saying yes to who and to what you've given me, and I'm trusting you with the rest. It doesn't mean that everything's always going to work out great, right? But it does mean that we can mourn with those who mourn. It means that we can celebrate with those who celebrate. And it means resisting all the ways that our culture is pushing us to gain the world at the expense of our souls, at the expense of our spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional well-being. I feel like this is so important in our day and age, but especially when I think of it in terms of our proposed vision statement here at English Lake. When I think of the direction that I personally feel like God is leading his church as a whole, and more specifically us here at ELC, following him will require an ability to embrace limits and really commit deeply to a few things in the midst of a society telling us to keep our distance and to keep our options open. I'm not saying say no to everything so that we can kick back and relax, right? That's not what it's about. Although rest is good and important, and some of us could probably use more of it. But I am talking about saying no to many things so that we can say yes to a few things that God has for us and commit to them at a really deep level. Getting too attached. So here again is our proposed vision statement for ELC. Discipleship to Jesus through loving community, intentional formation, and incarnational mission. I have some discussion questions. Actually, can I get some help? Lily, you up for it? Want to help me pass these out? Just run around and hand them out to people. I was going to have us kind of get in groups and go through these, but the more I think about it, first of all, for time's sake, we're not going to do that. But second of all, these are questions that require more than 5 minutes to really come up with answers for. These are things that I would love for us to take home, to read over, to pray over, and to really ask God what he has for us in this. But I thought we could maybe just kind of read through these together. And then, just take this next season to kind of think through this stuff and see if God has something in these questions for you and for us. So in terms of our proposed vision statement, thinking about, God, how are you asking me to maybe embrace some limits and to commit deeply to a few things? Let's read through these together. The first one, loving community. And the questions are, do you have at least a few deep relationships and people you're committed to where you know you are truly seen, known, and loved? If so, how can you be more intentional or go deeper in those relationships? If not, are there one or two people that you can approach by your desire for authentic connection and friendship? A few people. It doesn't have to be a ton. But I do feel like being part of the church, being part of community, being a Jesus follower requires each of us to at least have a few people in our lives that know us well, that are asking us good questions, that are encouraging us, that are challenging us, and that we're doing the same for. And so think about a few of those relationships maybe you have, and God, how can I maybe be more intentional in those? How are you maybe asking me to go deeper in those relationships? And if you're honest and say, I don't know if I have those, then think about, God, who are one or two people even that you're asking me to just approach with this desire for real intimate relationship? And how can we kind of foster that? Second one is in regards to intentional formation. What are one or two spiritual practices or disciplines that bring you life and are forming you into a person of love? How can you commit to more regularly engaging in those practices? And maybe what are one or two new practices that God may be asking you to pick up and start in this holiday season and even in the new year? God, what are some things you're asking me to commit to? Some ways of communing with you, some ways of communing with others that you're asking me to commit to on a deeper level in order to be formed more into a person of love, into a person that looks like you. And then the third one's in relation to incarnational mission. What are some tangible relationships or opportunities you currently have to engage with hurting or broken people? What are some steps you can begin to take to commit to a deeper level of moving into their neighborhood, to incarnating God's love for them and allowing yourself to be impacted and changed by them? And who can you bring with you in that endeavor? God, how, who, how, where, what opportunities are in front of me, what people are in my life that you're asking me to take on flesh and move into the neighborhood, that you're asking me to enter into relationship with for the purpose of incarnating God's love for them and also so that they can change and shape you as well. And then let's not do it alone. God, who can I take with me in this endeavor? And the last one is in regards to all of those then, what may God be asking you to say no to in your life at the moment in order to be able to say yes to these things? Because we are human beings. We are finite people with limitations. And rather than, as our culture encourages us to continue to push through those limitations at the expense of our own soul, how can we embrace those limits as opportunities, as gifts, to really jump into deeper commitment to the few things that God has in front of us? I just thought this is something obviously that's been kind of personal for me. But again, as we enter into the holiday season, I know it's a time that can be crazy and stressful. And just feel like God is asking us to find ways to slow down and to, again, embrace limits as opportunities to trust Him, as opportunities to rest in Him, as opportunities to be still and know that He is God. One thing that I think about quite a bit is a story. Some of you guys are probably familiar with a guy named Rob Bell. He was a pastor at a mega church when he was younger, and he tells a story about he was at lunch with one of his mentors, and they were kind of talking about everything that he was up to, and he was just sharing with this guy his schedule and the way that he was just running. And he said, the guy just interrupted him at one point, and he said, "Hey, Rob, you don't have to live like this." And he was like, I know, but he just keeps going, and here's what I got to do tomorrow, and da-da-da. And the guy interrupted me. "Hey, Rob, you don't have to live like this. You don't have to live." He just kept saying over and over until he finally hit him. Like, you're right. And I think about that a lot when I feel this temptation to run harder, to do more, to accomplish more, to da-da-da, and I feel it coming at the expense of my soul. May we, it's just in this season, maybe it's a pattern for you, but may we hear the voice of Jesus telling us, you don't have to live like this. Slow down. I have rest for your soul. My burden is easy. My yoke is light. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. He does have work for us to do, right? He does have community for us to go deep with. He does want to form us into people of love. He does have missional purpose for us. But in order to really go deep in those things, we're going to have to be able to embrace our limits and say no to some other things. And He's patient. He's gracious. He walks us into these things slowly. But may we just hear His voice more clearly in this holiday season as He tells us, just come, be with me, slow down. I have a few things for you to do. Commit to them deeply. That's what love does, right? So take those questions home. Think about them, pray about them, and just ask God to speak, especially in this season, but even this next year. God, what do you ask me to say no to so that I can say yes to the things you have for me, to the people you have for me, so I can go deep in those things. And we're just going to end here with taking communion. So if you guys want to just come up and get take the elements, and then we'll just take it together. So I'll lead us in that once we get back to our seats. That sound okay? Cool. Let's do that.
I just want to say, too, as we're coming up to take communion this morning, that we're talking about commitment. And communion represents an example of the greatest commitment. We talk about Jesus' commitment to us by going to the cross, giving everything. That's the example. That's the one we're following. So let's just allow that thought to sit with us as we take these elements and as we go through this. How willing are we to be committed?